All right, my English teacher friends. In this writing workshop video, I have one of my most superb, albeit wonkiest brain children I've ever created in my 21 plus years of teaching. My Lego Man template. So I know a lot of you are familiar with my inverted and declarative thesis and my syllogistic method template, my sentence stems, and you incorporate into your own teaching things that I do with my Word Study Academy and Nuance Academy. But it occurred to me the other day as I was working with an on-level sophomore that there are only so many compositional moves one needs to make within the space of my templates, within the paradigm of my templates, that it occurred to me, this eureka moment. I was like, holy cow. Each move is like the construction part of one part of a Lego man. So in doing this, you can do a couple of things. As we build this essay, you can use actual Lego parts. I know that that can be expensive for some teachers and you might not have them readily available. I have kids, so I have plenty of Legos at my disposal, but you can use a box of crayons and just draw along with me as I piece together this essay. So let me explain what you'll see in a second here. So we're going to use my Lego Man template to construct a literary analysis of Ozymandias. And I'll use my Lego Man template for all the other expository modes as well. Sit tight, I'll upload those videos as I make them. So as we do certain moves, say within the inverted thesis template, as soon as the student executes that move, they will be able to do certain things to their Lego man. Like, for example, add the eyes, add the mouth, add the hair, add the baseball cap. So each compositional move, once it's completed, will afford the student an opportunity to add to that Lego man. So with that being said, here's the kicker. Literary analysis has requisite parts to it. There's things that you need to do in terms of housing the thesis, in terms of ensuring that you're performing literary analysis and not plot analysis, which is often what students do. They switch the expository mode on us. There are certain things you have to do to ensure that you're embedding quotes. There are certain things you have to do to ensure that your line of reasoning stays intact. So we're going to take the totality of all those moves and assign a Lego characteristic, a Lego attribute to it. In terms of a prompt, I'm going to keep this very generic because I know that the more specific I get, the more nebulous my templates become. So generic prompt is this: perform literary analysis of the poem Ozymandias. Now, one of the things I always say in my writing workshop videos is this: in order to get students to do what I'm going to demonstrate in just a second, it took countless hours of me Bob Rossing my composition. And here's what I mean by that. There's a seismic difference between the assigning of writing and the direct explicit teaching of writing. So I position myself, just like Bob Ross always did, as the expert writer in my classroom. So like Bob Ross, I also use templates. He used something called a heuristic known as the wet on wet technique. So every single time he executed a natural landscape, he used the wet on wet technique. Whenever we do an expository piece, we can declare or invert the thesis and we can tackle all body paragraphs syllogistically. But that is just talk into the ether if that's all we're going to say to our students. We as expert writers in the classroom need to get to the proverbial canvas and easel and make sure that we're writing with our students, painting with our students, showing them how to execute the introductions, the body paragraphs, the topic sentences, the embedded quotes, the line of reasoning. All of the kit and caboodle we have to demonstrate. So in this writing workshop, feel free to use my exemplars and models that I have, or if you want to be brave and adventuresome, go out on a limb and write your own. So our first question is this: if we're going to perform literary analysis of Ozymandias, how do I construct the introductory paragraph? And as we know, you can either declare or invert a thesis. But here's the kicker. For literary analysis, just to keep this really simple and bite-sized, I always tell my students to invert the thesis and For lit analysis, all FRQs on the AP Lit exam, inverted thesis works. And then for the other expository modes like rhetorical analysis, you'll want to declare. And then synthesis, argument, persuasion, it's a 50-50 flip. So here's something that I encourage you all to do, especially if you're an AP literature teacher. Implicit in prompts. So I teach in New York State, so we have our Regents exam. I also teach AP Lang, AP Lit, and dabble a little bit with IB. In literary analysis prompts that states and boards typically make, you have two questions. What is the authorial intent? And how does the author construct meaning? If students answer those questions within the context of whatever prompt is hurled at them, they're guaranteeing themselves the thesis point. So it's going to come down to a correct reading of the poem or the piece that they have at their disposal, ascertaining the correct meaning, parceling it out correctly, and then answering two questions. What is the authorial intent? And how does the author construct meaning? So let's take a look at the inverted, because that's what we're going to be using. So in the inverted paradigm, you end with the thesis. Here's the kicker. Whenever you answer the question, how does the author construct meaning? That is your thesis statement, all right? That's the thesis. Construction of meaning equals thesis. So we're going to end by answering the question, how does the author construct meaning? Therefore, our first three sentences are going to be the context and background, answering the question, what is the authorial intent? And I know a lot of teachers ask, like, what's the universal theme? What's the universal truth? What's the exigence, etc.? So we're going to say, what is the authorial intent? From here, you also want to sprinkle in a little bit of tier 2 level vocabulary. And what I mean by that is your average run-of-the-mill SAT level words. I run something called a Word Study Academy with my students that runs the gamut of the academic year. I know when I inherit my students in the fall that there's a seismic vocabulary void. I have to do yeoman's work to help my students augment their vocabulary. So I have hundreds of exercises I do as vocabulary acquisition exercises. So in the samples, which are student written, they're not mine, my students wrote these, you should see some academic diction that's pretty nice, and especially in terms of writing with sophistication. The other thing my students tend to do pretty well if they work with me and give me an iota of effort is they have good syntactical flair. So I talk about sentence constructs a lot, and it's an idea that I stole from Strunk and White and their seminal text called Write It Right. In Write It Right, they have something called rule number 18. And rule number 18 makes the assertion that there's 12 different ways to cobble together a single sentence. So in order to achieve voice rhythm and flow, my students will have some syntactical manipulations to help them achieve that. Otherwise, it's going to have that droning da-dot, 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 da-dot rhythm that struggling and emerging students tend to overuse independent clauses and short, simple declarative sentences. So we want to break them of that. And then always, 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 every introduction that my students write, regardless of the expository mode, so lit analysis, rhetorical analysis, argument, persuasion, synthesis, even research, always house it in 4 sentences. So I'll show you real quick what the declarative looks like. It's just you lead with the thesis. And I typically shy away from this for literary analysis because it tends to set the kids up for a plot synopsis, like a Cliff Note summation. So I want to make sure that they're meeting the demands of the assignment and doing literary analysis from top to bottom. So let's review this real quick. 3 plus 1, 3 authorial intent, 1 construction of meaning. So let's build this together. Let's take a look at student sample number 1, and then I'll show you how we can build the Lego components around this. So the 3 plus 1 with tier 2 and sentence constructs looks like this. When we thumb our nose at the eternal rules of God, it is us that look the fool in the end. With grave error, Ozymandias forgot this fundamental understanding in his lifetime. In spite of his accomplishments here on earth, They were rendered to the same fate as every man upon his passing. We all end up in the same place, dead and decaying. Shelley conveys this truth through situational and verbal irony and buttresses the concept by manipulating an irregular rhyme scheme. So that's the whole thing. Let's break this down, right? So you either equip the kids with a box of crayon and a blank sheet of paper, or you give them the Lego pieces. So let's take a look at what we're going to do here with this introduction. The introduction is going to be the head, right? Because it's the head of the whole essay. It's the brains of the essay. So the construction of meaning sentence is going to be the thesis, right? The idea that the student must have a thesis, especially at the AP level, you have to get the thesis point in the introduction. So that's going to be the head. The three authorial intent sentences are going to be the eyes and the brows. The minimum of 2 tier 2 level words is going to be the mouth. And the variety of sentence structures is the hair. And then if the student can, master their grammar, punctuation, and syntax, that's accessorized points. So you could add the beard, add a pipe, add glasses. So let's break down each piece here and see if this kid can cobble together the Lego man. First, let's start with the head, the construction of meaning sentence. They have it here. So here it is. Shelley conveys this truth through situational and verbal irony and buttresses the concept by manipulating an irregular rhyme scheme. So whenever you're using terms, devices, techniques, that constitutes the thesis statement. So since it's an inverted thesis, this is sentence number 4. The introduction concluded with this. So let's go see about the eyes and eyebrows. They do have 3 sentences that get to the authorial intent. And I know some teachers might look at this and say, I don't like the pronoun use of this. I don't get hung up on that. So later on in the academic year, I'll tell my students to, focus more on their pronouns. But for this, I'm fine with the use of we. I'm okay with that. We're just experimenting with templates. We're learning a system. So I'm not going to be nitpicky about that. If you want to, have a lesson on that with your students with this particular essay, then have at it. So these are the first 3 sentences, and they express the authorial intent, the exigence, the universal truth, the universal theme. So let's just review it. When we thumb our nose at the eternal rules of God, it is us that look the fool in the end. With grave error, Ozymandias forgot this fundamental understanding in his lifetime. In spite of his accomplishments here on earth, they were rendered to the same fate as every man upon his passing. We all end up in the same place, dead and decaying, right? So that idea that Ozymandias has this bravado, this machismo that, because of, the accomplishments and the wealth and the accolades he's acclaimed in this lifetime, that he's going to be immortal and remembered for all of eternity and have this imposing force for all of time. And it's just not true. And that's the irony of the piece. So let's skip to tier 2. Can we add a mouth to this Lego man? I like some of the verbiage in here. Convey, buttress, grave errors, fundamental. So I was looking for 2 tier 2 level words. It's kind of an artificial construct, the number 2. But I'm thinking, show that you can have a little bit of academic tone that you can cop in an introduction, right? It's an academic essay, so show your academic best self. So I know, too, that when we peer edit and do these things, sometimes students have this idea that if they use $1 million words, that it's the equivalent of good writing. So it's the idea, too, that in order to add the mouth to the figurine, that your words sound natural, you're within your wheelhouse, you're in your lane, you're not inventing words, you're not misusing words, you're not sounding overly pedantic or contrived. Good words, right in the sweet spot of your wheelhouse. And this student did a good job of that. How about rule number 18? The sentence constructs. Let's break down the sentences here from top to bottom. So look at the first sentence. When we thumb our nose at the eternal rules of God, it is us that look the fool in the end. So just a mid-length sentence, middle comma. So I tell my students, don't parallel your sentences, right? You've used that sentence construct. Next sentence, change it. So look, with grave error, comma, Ozymandias forgot this fundamental understanding in his lifetime. So just a simple clause, comma, boom, off you go. In spite of his accomplishments here on earth, comma, they were rendered to the same fate as every man upon his passing. Use of dash. We all end up in the same place, dead and decaying. Double dash. Shelley conveys this truth through situational and verbal irony, comma, and buttresses the concept by manipulating an irregular rhyme scheme. So the parallelism is what yields that da-dot, droning rhythm. And this student avoided any parallelism in her introduction. And it has really good voice rhythm and flow. There's a variety of sentence constructs there. So I would say go ahead with the rest of the Lego Man. That was pretty good. So this student also did not have any punctuation errors. So I would allow them to accessorize their piece. So let's see that again. Let's do that all over again. Because it might be a little confusing just after one time. So let's see it again and have student number 2 step to the plate and try this 3+1 paradigm. So we're going 3 sentences authorial intent, 1 sentence construction of meaning. An essential tenet of life is that it is fleeting and that at some point in time, we will meet our final day. It is only those with unchecked egos that believe that they can defy this natural law of order. In spite of his bravado, the tested time delivers this truth to the great Ozymandias in that he experiences the shared fate of every living creature, great or small. Shelley, through all 3 paradigms of irony, conveys the plight of one man's sheer hubris. Right, so you can see there the construction of meaning sentence is where you have to drop your terms. That's going to be the thesis. So let's see if this kid, how much of the head of the Lego Man this kid can assemble. And you can see here, this is how they diagrammed their Lego Man. So my students used Canva in order to make their Lego Man. So like I said, you can use crayons, real Legos, Canva, anything at your disposal. My kids have Canva accounts, and it was pretty cool to jazz up their heads this way. So they even accessorize. So let's break it down here. Last sentence, do they have construction of meaning? Let's look. Shelley, through all 3 paradigms of irony, conveys the plight of one man's sheer hubris. They got it. Do they have 3 sentences of authorial intent? Yes. Do they have some tier 2? Well, I like fleeting, tenet, unchecked is nice. So very good vocab. Paradigm is nice. Sheer hubris. Bravado. So they got that. And then the sentence structures are also very good in terms of achieving the voice rhythm and flow. I would give total thumbs up to this one. This kid out of the gate is off to blazing speed and has a fantastic foundation upon which to build the rest of the essay. So that's the thing, right? The introductory paragraph is kind of the engine. It's the hub. It's the brain. It's the head system of the whole essay. So if there are glitches going on in that introductory paragraph, it stands to reason that the rest of the essay is going to fumble a little bit. So it's mightily important that students execute that well. All right, my friends. Yes, you can. It's my pep talk. This might look hard from even a teacher standpoint and from a student standpoint, but you can. It just takes practice. Teachers, you got to Bob Ross this for your kids in order to demystify it. So student 3 comes to the plate. And they likewise are going to do the inverted thesis template of 3+1, sprinkle in some tier 2, focus on those sentence constructs, and have at it so that it looks like this. No life is immortal no matter the accomplishments one experiences here on earth. In fact, regardless of life experience, all life comes from dust and returns to the dust of the earth in spite of one's willpower to reverse this common fate. no matter the wealth, fame, or fortune one has accumulated during their lifetime. The inescapable truth is that death renders all for naught. So we're at the fourth sentence, construction of meaning. Let's see what terms, devices, techniques this student uses. Shelley touches upon this idea by manipulating a variety of ironies and a forced rhyme scheme. So each one, the construction of meaning is the thesis statement. You have to use the terms, the devices, the techniques. So let's see if this kid can build the head. Construction of meaning sentence, it's there, right? 3 sentences for the authorial intent. They definitely can be awarded the eyes and the brows. Minimum of 2 tier 2 level words, absolutely, that's present. Variety of sentence structures, yes, they can add the hair. And then my students, I really teach this ad nauseum. The grammar, punctuation, and syntax is a key component of my Nuance Academy that I teach very early in the academic year. So I request mastery on this. I have I call it, I award certificates for my academies, my Nuance Academy and my Word Study Academy. Students get a 50 mentor sentence test that's devoid of punctuation, full of grammar mistakes and syntactical blunders. And students need to revise all 50 sentences and score 90 or higher on it before they're awarded their certificate. And they have to retest until they get a 90. I really demand excellence when it comes to grammar, punctuation, and syntax. So that's a focal point. So that kid has no punctuation mistakes, so they can accessorize, right? So you're getting the gist here. At this stage of the game, I would pause the video if you're using this as a writing workshop with your students and have them try their hand at their own inverted thesis. And teachers, by all means, you try your hand at it too. Show your students how to do it, the old 3+1 system. So immediately, we're done with our intros. We have our head, we've accessorized it, nice eyes, nice eyebrows, good mouth. We got a beard, glasses, you name it. We've accessorized this Lego head. We need to construct the body. So the next question is this: how do I write the body paragraphs? All right. So I'm assuming a lot of you guys are familiar with my work, so I'm going to fly through this quickly. Body paragraph template, I use something called the syllogistic method. It's rooted in the Aristotelian tradition, comes from Aristotle. He ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich town boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling, and they'd often throw out these juicy essential questions, and you see them in some of the seminal texts from this period, like Plato's Republic. What is justice? And the great scholars and philosophers would step to the proverbial mic and drop their definition of justice, and Aristotle would listen to these debates, and he said to himself, just like we do as composition instructors, why are some of my students like killer at argument and debate, and some are just men, some tank bomb, they're discursive and can't cobble together a cogent argument. And one day he got it. He was like, aha, the really good orators, the kids that really argue well, they are making syllogisms. So they have a computative mathematical approach to the delineation of their arguments. They're going premise, premise, conclusion. So let me give you an example. If I were to say premise number 1, arsenic is deadly, you would say, Christian, yes, that is true. Like everyone would agree with me on that. But if I say premise number 2, my dog ate arsenic, we're all logically going to conclude, Christian, that's not going to bode well for your dog. Your dog's probably going to die, right? Aristotle would call that a cogent argument, right? We call it line of reasoning in composition. And in literary analysis in particular, oftentimes, and I'll make some videos of this if I can get College Board approval to use their work. A lot of the sample papers that I see from the College Board, students only present the second premise for all 3 FRQs on the AP Lit exam. And that's why I identify them as plot analysis and not literary analysis. They're not even meeting the demands of the assignment. But That is what it is when you only present a second premise. So how do we turn this into a template for the purposes of creating literary analysis? First premise is going to be an argument containing terms, devices, techniques, and that's going to be 3 sentences long. I will model that for you a couple times, and that's going to be the torso in just a second. So a 3-sentence argument using terms, devices, techniques. The second premise is textual support. We got to quote or paraphrase and do it like a teeter-totter balance of the two. And then conclusions. Body paragraphs have conclusions as well. You just can't, abandon a body paragraph on a quote. You have to conclude everything. So this is the textual analysis, and it's the links, the echoes, and the promise. Link everything back. All of this is going to take 10 to 12 sentences. So a syllogistic body paragraph is 10 to 12 sentences. So as I said, the first premise is going to be the torso, and it's a 3-sentence argument using terms, devices, techniques. So you might be asking yourselves, Christian, you're talking into the ether here. How do I write a first premise? Show me, Bob Ross. So you're seeing here, like, this is the importance of Bob Rossing your instruction. I'm going to demystify it for you. So immediately, I'm going to give you a sentence stem. If we're gonna analyze Ozymandias from top to bottom, because students often ask the question, where do I begin my analysis? I tell them begin where the author begins. So I have a sentence stem for that, and it's right from the onset. So if students are following along with me, literally write that down. Right from the onset, comma. Indicate to your reader that you have a chronology, that you have a sequence, you have like a very methodological approach to your line of reasoning. So my students steal that from me right from the onset. Now look where we go the next 3 sentences. We got to hone in on the terms, devices, techniques. Right from the onset, the narrator introduces the central irony of the piece by shifting the focus onto the anecdote of the traveler. Through the slow enumeration of Ozymandias' character, the narrator builds the drama of the situation in order to deliver the ultimate punchline. Even the forced rhyme scheme helps to aid in the development of the delivery. So you can see here it's 3 sentences. Again, you're going to focus on the tier 2 and the sentence constructs, just like we were doing before. But you just drop your terms, devices, techniques, but you go in order in which they appear in the poem. I like this first premise, doing it this way, because oftentimes when students write, they do 1 paragraph tone, 1 paragraph diction, 1 paragraph syntax. Dude, on the AP exam, you're totally precluding yourself from the sophistication point. Way too dutiful. I teach on-level sophomores, on-level juniors, and I even don't want my on-level students writing that way. So in the first premise, you kind of multitask. You begin to see where the terms, devices, and techniques hold hands and intersect and interface with each other. All right, that might be confusing for students and teachers. So let's see it one more time. How would I do a first premise without the sentence stem? Because when you get to the second body paragraph, you've already said right from the onset, and you're like at the middle of the poem, and then you got to do the middle all the way to the end of the poem. So again, it's 3 sentences. Focus on different terms, devices, techniques. So look at this one. The epitaph creates an ironic juxtaposition between Ozymandias' sheer arrogance and bravado in contrast to the harsh realities of the human condition. No matter one's accomplishments in life, man is rendered to the same shared fate. Even the alternating rhyme scheme reinforces the central conflict. Ozymandias' huge ego coming into collision with the reality of the human condition. So you can see here that first premise is going to be 3 sentences long. Focus on the terms, devices, techniques. If a student does that, award them their torso. They can begin to build the body, because that first premise is kind of the foundation for the whole rest of the body paragraph. So it's really important. And we'll talk about what does not go in those 3 sentences. No plot summary, no quotes, right? It's all argument. It has to be 3 sentences of argument. On FRQ1 of the AP Lang exam, the College Board states 3 times, your argument must be central. And I wish they would say that on all of the FRQs. We're doing expository writing, so we're arguing. So keep the centrality of the argument by writing 3 sentences. Really get anchored in that argument. So from here, all right, a good practice that I have with my students is I go quote hunting. So for each of those first premises, I have a promise that I made. I promise you, dear reader, that I'm going to talk about the rhyme scheme. I promise you, dear reader, that I'm going to talk about the conflict. I promise you, dear reader, that I'm going to talk about all 3 forms of irony, whatever it is. So now you got to go find your quotes that align with the promise of the first premise. All right. So how are we going to build this whole Lego man here? What's this going to look like? We know that the head is going to be the inverted thesis. A syllogistic body paragraph is 10 to 12 sentences. We got our first 3 done. So the arms of each quote must wrap around the promise of the first premise. So if you have, let's say that you said forced rhyme scheme in your first premise. You need quotes and or paraphrases for the forced rhyme scheme. Let's say you put down verbal irony and dramatic irony. You need quotes and or paraphrases for the ironies. And then let's say you talked about conflict. You need quotes and or paraphrases for conflict. So the arms are going to wrap around the first premise, the promise of the first premise. So you got to make sure that your quotes are germane. And this is a really nice template in terms of teaching students to quote with deliberation. All the quotes need to be germane to the promise of the first premise. The hands, right? You have 5 fingers on your hands. It's cool because we align it to something that I call the 5-word rule. Before a student quotes, if they place a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote and keep the quote small, bracket when needed, they can get a really cool conversational thing going on with their embedded quotes. I'll model that in just a second. Spiffy attire is going to be tier 2 vocabulary and sentence constructs. And then the legs, a syllogism needs a 2 to 3 sentence conclusion. It's the link, the echo, the promise. And then the feet is going to be our conclusion paragraph. So let's take this from the top. So here's a brand new first premise, and we're going to use the stem. All right. So this is going to be the first body paragraph. So we're going to use the stem right from the onset. And this is different from the one you saw prior. So now you've seen 3 first premises. 3 sentences, argue with the terms, devices, techniques. Right from the onset, the syntax in the forced rhyme scheme further accentuates the ironic nature of the poem. For just as Ozymandias is trying to force his will upon fate to change its natural course, so is the rhyme structure forced to highlight this point. The couplet to conclude the poem further brings this juxtaposition to the forefront. All right, so from here we got to go quote hunting and paraphrase hunting. We promised you a big focus on syntax, in particular the rhyme scheme. So we're going to need quotes and or paraphrases for that rhyme scheme, quotes and or paraphrases for the irony, and then this student mentioned the couplet at the end and how it ties back to the juxtaposition. We're going to need quotes and or paraphrases for that. So let's jump to the second premise, and that's what you're looking at here. There's a sentence stem that I use for the second premise, and the very first word is immediately. I have my students drop the word immediately, comma, because it ties back to the first promise of the first premise. So the first promise was the forced rhyme scheme. So you need to quote and or paraphrase that. So the immediately logically ties back. So in the second premise, I have my students begin the process of quoting and paraphrasing. So 4th sentence, start introducing the quotes and the paraphrases. So let's see where this student goes and see if we can award the Lego man an arm. Immediately, the AB arrangement forces the B pattern in that stone and frown do not rhyme exactly. Do you see there? You get into your textual support. You quote, you paraphrase, you got to analyze it. Placing the emphasis on the stone frowned is ironic because Ozymandias would definitely be frowning could he pull back the veil of time to see his hapless state of being. His mighty works did not withstand the test of time and eternally endure in the sense that his ego is forever propped up. Instead, his visage comes to know the decay of the colossal wreckage and cruel knowingness that God's hand comes to smite all sense of someone's inflated ego. Right? So that's just kind of a sense of how you do it there. So I like it when my students don't use big block quotes, small quotes, 5-word rule, right? So keep the quotes conversational, embed the quotes. So it goes on here. It's just continued. I ran out of space on that slide, so I'm going over to the next one. Ozymandias' bravado is ironically rendered comical. He is now witnessing that all life diminishes itself to become the lone and level sands that stretch far away into a shared human fate. So let's talk about that 5-word rule. Go to the period after comical and count with me. 1 word, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Drop the quote, get out of the quote, end it. Throw a period. So if you use 5 words in front of the quote and keep the quote small, it should sound conversational, but note how the student needed to use a bracket. That's really sophisticated when students can do that. It's very good. So we have enough quotes and or paraphrases for everything that was promised in that first premise. So now we have to add the legs, which comprises the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph. And I want to articulate that very clearly. We're not at the conclusion of the essay. It's the conclusion of the body paragraph, the first body paragraph. This move usually takes 2 to 3 sentences. You go echo the prompt, link it right back to the thesis, keep the promise of the first premise. So look what the student did. No matter how great you are during your time spent here on earth, fate brings you back to the humbling reality that we are all bound by the eternal rules. Death is inevitable. But Shelley even takes it one step further. Oftentimes a mighty man thinks he's mighty simply through the acquisition of mighty possessions. The couplet reminds us of this truth. It's all for naught once you perish this earth. All right, and that is a full syllogistic body paragraph. Again, if you're doing this exercise as a writing workshop in your class, pause the video here and have your students practice those first premises. Go quote hunting. Bob Ross your instruction, and look at a lot of student writing. Have students volunteer their work, do peer edits, and have the kids be in charge of this. So the next question is this. What do I do next? Because you're not done with your essay. All you have is an intro and one body paragraph. You bust out another syllogism, right? The essay is going to be 4 paragraphs long. So on all AP exams, Lit and Lang, my students only do 4 paragraphs. Intro, syllogistic body paragraph 1, syllogistic body paragraph 2, and then a conclusion. So I just have them bust out another syllogism and make sure that they have the torso, the arms, and they can accessorize, add the hands and the legs and all that stuff. So we're at the middle of the poem. And we have that poignant ending that we still have to get to. So change up the terms, the devices, techniques, change the quotes, the paraphrases, and analyze the rest. So we're coming towards the end of our essay here, right? We got to wrap the essay up, which is going to comprise and constitute the feet, because our Lego man has no feet to stand upon. So the final stones to this foundation here. I use sentence stems. I got about 15 of them. And one of the ones that my students really like is simply said. And I often end literary analysis essays kind of with like a thematic fireworks display. I go all theme, all prompt, and it takes 3 to 4 sentences. That's it. So a really heavy focus on theme, heavy focus on prompt, and tie it all back. So one sentence stem, as I already alluded to, is simply said, comma. So look how this student uses that stem. Simply said, man cannot escape the dictates of fate. In spite of one's stature and position, invariably we all are rendered to the same destiny. Shelley's Ozymandias is an ironic reminder of this fact. 3 sentences, that's it. You don't need to do anything more than that. It's very simple. And then the last thing in terms of the accessorizing of your Lego man. Correct grammar, punctuation, and syntax. That's the last giddy up. So if students are doing well in that ballpark, then allow them to accessorize that Lego man. All right, let's talk about something cool. Some of you might know me in the circles for my alternative grading methods. You totally can use the Lego man template as an alternative grading method, because here's the deal. Let's imagine a peer edit. I think peer edits don't work oftentimes because students don't have a shared language. Once kids have a shared language and a template, like the shared language of a template, peer editing is going to work. So let's do this. All right, this is how I run it in my classroom. I usually put the desk in squares of 4. So I create a square of 4 desks. Each student comes to the square with a printed version of their essay. Student will pass their essay to a peer, and the peer on a separate sheet of paper will draw with a box of crayons, or if you got Legos, you can use the Legos, or you can do it on Canva. They will draw the head, and they will add everything to the head that they possibly can. And let's say, for example, that the student doesn't have the construction of meaning sentence. The peer can say to the writer, hey man, your last sentence doesn't have any terms, devices, or techniques. I can't afford you the head. Like, you didn't do this right. And the kid says, what do you mean? What do you mean? I'm like, look, man, look at mine, man. You got to say the terms, the devices, techniques here. This is an inverted thesis. Oh man, let me fix that. You, teacher, are going to be liberated from a whole bunch of grading if you do this. If you do decide to traditionally grade, I've done this before. I grade them and I draw pictures of Lego men on their paper. And if they're missing things, I omit it from the drawing. I give the drawing back to the kid, and they have to find out why they are missing those components of the Lego man by conferencing with a peer. And then the peer teaches them what they're missing, and you can go about the revision process that way. Very cool alternative grading methods. You can do a whole bunch of stuff with this Lego man. So let me wrap this up by saying this. Happy teaching, happy writing. And I hope this Lego man template serves you well, and it can help elucidate and demystify some of these compositional, hacks that we have. I think there's a lot of teachers in the YouTube world with very promising templates. My students need something a little bit more tangible and palpable that they can manipulate when I inherit them in September. So this seems to work well. All right. Let's really finish this up here. If you need to contact me for any reason, want more clarifying information, or just want to give a shout out, my email is teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. If you want to get any information about my PDs that I offer through the National Writing Project, we go all calendar year. So this summer, for example, we're doing FRQ boot camps for the AP exam. I have my Teach It Right self mastermind. I have a self-paced course. We have the Nuance Academies, the Word Study Academies, the Alternative Grading Academies. So if you want any information on those professional development opportunities, go to my webpage at www.teachinghowtowrite.com. All right, I hope you're well. I hope this serves you well and you found it very edifying and of interest. It's definitely an odd brainchild, but it really does help elucidate how to construct a literary analysis. And as I said at the beginning of the video, I'll be doing these for all the other expository modes as well. All right, take care.